Welcome. I'm Eric Fleming, host of A Moment with Eric Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Eric Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenteric.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NVG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Eric Fleming. I am your host, Eric Fleming. So, greetings and thank y'all for listening. I greatly appreciate y'all tuning in to the podcast. We still are on our quest for 20,000. So, if we can get 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year, I will be eternally grateful to you all to make this happen. And we can keep doing what we're doing, right? I've got some guests on that one of them has been a regular on the show, but this regular has brought a friend because they've written a book together, which is a very, very good book. And we'll get into that. It's a fictional book, which for people that know me, I'm not big in fiction, but I like to read. So that's one of the cool things about this job is that I get to interview a lot of people who write books. So I do get to read, and I'm glad my reading habit has picked back up because of this. And then I have another guest. She's a professor of political science, and she has also written a book. And I think it's a timely book. For the times that we are in, it's very, very important. And so we'll get into that, and I may have something for y'all extra, but y'all just have to listen to the podcast to see. But again, this is going to be another great show. I enjoy doing this. I enjoy lifting people up that are doing the work. I enjoy talking about politics, even though it's kind of painful right now, but even more so, you have to have a love for politics to talk about what's going on and, to get my viewpoints on it and what we can do or what we should not do, right? Because there's always that. So anyway, I hope y'all enjoy the show. So we're going to go ahead and kick it off as always with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. President Trump announced higher China tariffs while holding off 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada until April 2nd. Trump declared America is back in a lengthy congressional address defending his trade wars and government worker purges. Representative Al Green was censured by the House of Representatives for being disruptive during Trump's address. The U.S. Supreme Court blocked Trump's bid to withhold payments to foreign aid groups for completed work. Trump paused U.S. military aid to Ukraine after criticizing Ukrainian President Zelensky for insufficient gratitude. European leaders agreed to draft a Ukraine peace plan for U.S. security guarantees, vowing increased defense spending and forming a coalition of the willing. Egypt's Gaza reconstruction proposal to counter President Trump's U.S.-led resettlement idea was adopted at an emergency Arab summit. Texas measles cases rose to 159, with hospitalizations increasing and an unvaccinated child's death marking the first U.S. measles fatality since 2015. House Speaker Mike Johnson advised Republicans to avoid town halls after protests over Trump-backed federal job cuts. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser plans to redesign Black Lives Matter Plaza following GOP threats to cut transportation funding unless the name is changed. Robert Crimo III pled guilty to murder for a 2022 mass shooting at a Chicago suburbs 4th of July parade that killed 7 and injured over 40. Democrats sued President Trump over an executive order they claim illegally expands his authority over the Federal Election Commission. Ex-New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced a mayoral run aiming to replace embattled Mayor Eric Adams. And U.S. Congressman Sylvester Turner, 70, former NAACP President Hazel Dukes, 92, and R&B singer Angie Stone, 63, all passed away. I am Grace G., and this has been a Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for my guests, Will Cooper and Michael McKinley. Will Cooper is an attorney who's done work for major companies, including Google and Samsung. He's also an award-winning journalist whose articles have appeared in hundreds of publications around the world, including the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Chicago Sun-Times, and Jerusalem Post. Publishers Weekly called his writings about Donald Trump a compelling rallying cry for democratic institutions under threat in America. And he's a frequent guest on national television and radio programs and on numerous podcasts, especially this one. Will has been a regular on this podcast ever since I started having guests on the podcast. And so I greatly appreciate him coming on with this latest venture that he is endeavored in. And he lives in California. Now, joining him is Michael McKinley. Michael McKinley is an award-winning writer, journalist, and filmmaker. Michael was educated at the University of British Columbia and Oxford University, where he also directed academic summer schools, as well as at Cambridge University. He has written more than 20 books on subjects ranging from sport, military history, religion, business, and politics, and crime fiction. These include his book, Willie, the game-changing story of the NHL's first black player, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award and is now being made into a feature film. His first novel, The Penalty Killing, was nominated for an Arthur Ellis Award as Best Debut Crime Novel. Michael has also created, written, and produced television series for CNN, the History Channel, Discovery, TSN, CBC, and co-created and co-executive produced NBC Peacock / Sky UK's ratings hit Epstein's Shadow, the LaShane Maxwell's story. I can never say her name right. His newest documentary, which he also wrote, produced, and directed, Let's Do a Miracle, recently debuted at the Big Apple Film Festival in New York City, where he also served as a juror for their 2025 documentary season. In 2024, he has published the cyber crime thriller, A Quiet Life, Lou Varro, the godfather of U.S. hockey, and Diamond Dust, the compelling story of a brilliant Mormon counterfeiter in Utah, as well as the airline terror thriller Squawk 7700. In 2025, his co-written Vatican thrillers The Glamour of Evil and Something Wicked will be published, as will his co-written political book Party Crasher, Wrestling with Third-Party Politics in the U.S., the business book Blood Feud, Greed, Hubris, and Redemption in a Family Business, the social justice book on thin ice, and LAPD veterans 30-year journey toward a new culture of policing. The crime memoir Redeemed, A Journey from Darkness to Light, and the political and business book Who Knew? My Journey Through Vietnam, Harvard, the White House, the Department of State, and corporate America so far. Michael lives in Brooklyn, New York with his wife and daughter. And so you heard me mention in one of those, the cyber crime thriller, Quiet Life. That's the book that Will and Michael co-wrote and we'll be discussing today on the podcast. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as guests on this podcast, Will Cooper and Michael McKinley. All right. I got my good friend, my good friend Will Cooper on the show. Will, how you doing?
Great to be here, Eric. I'm doing well. Thank you.
And I see that you brought a friend with you this time, Michael McKinley. Mike, how you doing?
Great, Eric. Thank you for inviting us on.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. I was pleasantly surprised when Will sent me this book called A Quiet Life. And I started reading it and I said, oh yeah, we ought to, and I assumed that Will wanted to talk about it when he sent it. And so I was really, really encouraged to read it. And it kind of took me aback a little bit. And I'll get into that reason why. But I enjoyed reading the book and I recommend people go get it. And we'll talk a little bit about it on the podcast and try to gin up some interest without spoiling it too much, right?
Right.
So normally I do like some icebreakers at the beginning. Will is very familiar with this. So Mike, we're breaking you in. So
Okay.
What I want to do is I want you, Mike, to answer this quote. If tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. What does that quote mean to you?
It means that somehow generated the foreign enemy from within, I think is what it means. I'm an immigrant, Eric. I came to the United States from Canada when my daughter was entering kindergarten, 2009, which was a year of hope and change. And so my wife and I decided we would follow the hope and change. So I've always thought that the greatest enemy that exists in the United States was from within. And I still believe that. And I think now we're seeing evidence of that happening, alas. And Will and I addressed that in A Quiet Life as well, because we thought it was possible.
Yeah. So I've got another one, icebreaker. So I'll start with Will with this one. And then Mike, I want you to participate too.
Okay.
So Will, I want you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
11.
Okay.
I got the easy question, Michael.
All right. Number 11. Where do you go to check a fact that you see, hear, or read?
Whoa, that's a huge question. That I've been thinking a lot about that, Eric, about facts and how to confirm them. In the social media era and in the media ecosystem we live in, this information is just oozing out of people's pores to a degree that's unfathomable. And I frankly don't believe anything I read by virtually anybody at this point. So if I want to verify a fact, I roll up my sleeves, I pour a cup of tea, I get ready for a real effort. And what I typically do is try to find cross references at a variety of professional sources. And if they are all saying the same thing, I assume there's a high, although not certain degree, a high likelihood that it's true. But you asked a very important question in my view.
Have you heard of this thing called Snopes.com?
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, you've heard of it. It was like, It was another guest that picked number 11 and he said that was his go-to as far as like finding some information. I haven't looked at it yet, but I said I would. All right, Mike, give me a number between 1 and 20. Do not choose 11.
Okay. 17.
All right. 17 is, what's something about people who see the world differently than you that you've come to appreciate?
Oh, that's a very good question because I've been working on that. Because so many people, about half the country, it seems, sees the world differently than me these days, Eric. So what I appreciate is their willingness to listen to my view, I guess, is I am willing to listen to theirs in a civilized way if we could possibly accomplish that. Willingness to have a dialogue. And that I know tends to the question, but that's what I really appreciate somebody who has a different view, if they're willing to discuss it with me in a way that will allow me to give them my opinion. Because as you know, Will alluded to in his answer to his question, the disinformation just, we get hammered, you know, and if you try to counter it, you get hammered in all kinds of different ways, you know, rather than listened to or engaged with, right? So that's how I think I will.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely appreciate that, because you can't have a dialogue if people are not willing to listen to each other.
No, can't.
And we're running into a lot of that. We kind of saw that. I don't know if y'all followed earlier today, they censored Congressman Green for his outburst at the Trump address to Congress Tuesday. And, it was just, it was just apparent, that we've gotten to a point where our leaders are just not even trying to dialogue with each other.
Yeah.
And, it's like, following the decorum of the House, it was understood that the congressman, and he agreed that he was going to get disciplined for it. But, the way that people have been acting in that body ever since Joe Wilson, we can thank Joe Wilson from South Carolina. It's just, what I'm saying? It's like they could have censored 4 or 5 people today on both sides for what happened. So I agree with you, Mike. We got to have a dialogue. So, William, I want to go to you with this particular question. What led you to co-write a fictional book about politics? You've been writing all this great stuff, all these columns, all these books about Donald Trump and his impact on American politics. Why did you decide to co-write a fictional book?
Well, I love fiction, Eric. I love books of all kinds. And there's things you can do with fiction, of course, that you can't do with nonfiction. You can explore things, you can be creative, let your imagination run wild. I actually think with this book and in fiction, a lot of fiction for me is you let your paranoia run wild. Like we all live life and we think, well, what if these things happen? And that would be really terrible. And they almost never do, knock on wood. But with a novel, you get to write it out. And so I thought it would be really fun to tell a story that was my paranoia and my imagination running wild. And then when I met Michael, I met a great partner with, tremendous creativity and talent, and got me even more excited about it. And we joined forces and just had a lot of fun. But it was really just an opportunity to express myself in a new form. It's still political and it still makes a lot of points about society and government. But so it's not a romance novel, but it was really just a fun opportunity to do something different.
So how does the collab writing work? It's like, do you take a chapter, then Mike, you take a chapter, or y'all just kind of, how does a collaboration like that work?
We swap chapters pretty much as we go. It was Will's idea for the title and the 2 characters who have an ordinary or a desire for a quiet life, and that really caught my imagination. What does that mean today? How can we pull that off? And so then it was a exchange of ideas that eventually evolved into chapters and go back and forth. And then, hocus pocus, we have a draft finally. And then that's the fun part to me, Eric, is revising the draft, because, you've now got down on paper And now okay, that might be better if we do this, or and then our dialogue continued. So it was a real pleasure doing that with Will because of all his political astuteness and sensibility and talent. It was great to do.
Yeah, Mike, being a filmmaker, I know that you're used to doing collabs and stuff. And we were talking about Netflix because I know on certain series, you'll have one director do like a couple episodes and another director do another. So it's like, but it's all one vision. So I was just kind of curious about that piece. So, Mike, you said that Will came up with the characters.
It was Will's idea, yeah. For Michael, the two characters, Michael and Pam Housen, were this young couple who live in Indiana. And that's where he situated them and called it A Quiet Life. And said something bad happens to them because of something Michael did, either deliberately or accidentally, or not at all. And so that's what kicks it off. And it's a phishing email that Michael clicks on that essentially creates global havoc in the book and in the world that we've created. In The Quiet Life of Michael and Pam gets very noisy very fast. And they become enemies of the state and have to prove their innocence in order to survive, along with other things they have to prove in order to survive. So it was a lot of fun to run with it because, we could run all over the place. And we did.
Yeah. So, Will, you want to, since the characters were kind of your idea, kind of tell us who Michael and Pam are. And is Housen, is that how you pronounce it?
Yep. Michael and Pam Housen. Yeah. And Michael was very nice in his answer, but the two main characters I had thought up, but he brought a lot of wonderful characters from scratch into the book that created the whole narrative. But the central premise, Michael and Pam, the aim with the book, and I think the biggest sort of part of the book that we really wanted to have be the central theme was two very normal, ordinary people. Most people, they just want to wake up, they're in their early 30s. They just want to wake up, go to work, get some things done, drink their coffee at their desk, come home, watch their favorite Netflix show, probably one of Michael's shows that he has on Netflix, and then relax, go to bed, and do it all over again the next day. And then in the weekend, go to a baseball game and have fun. And that's what most people want in life. And they're not looking to be at the center of a geopolitical firestorm. And the point of the book is to bring these characters and say, by a very innocent act, and there's some mystery about whether this happened or didn't, but a single click of a mouse, Michael has let Iranian hackers into his company, and his company services the U.S. government. So Iranian cyber hackers have now gotten into the U.S. government. So he was just drinking his coffee on this normal, quiet day. One little click, and that act by those hackers triggered a war. The U.S. president used it as a pretext for war. So the lesson is normal people, everyday lives, just like all of us, most of us at least, thrust against their will into the center of the biggest story in the whole world.
Yeah. So, and either one of y'all can answer the questions from this point forward, but I have to be honest. I didn't like what y'all did to Chicago. That kind of hurt my heart that y'all did that to Chicago. But what? Why was Bloomington, Indiana, the backdrop of all the places in America? Why Bloomington, Indiana?
It could have been anywhere. It had well, let me step back and say I love Chicago deeply. No offense. Yes, maybe Michael meant offense, but not me. No.
I love Chicago too.
We love Chicago. But it could have been anywhere. Could have been Santa Fe, New Mexico. Could have been Jackson, Mississippi, where Eric and I have Mississippi lineage. It could have been anywhere. The point was, it was just a relatively normal place. It wasn't Rodeo Drive. It wasn't the center of Park Avenue. It was just a normal Midwestern town normal Midwestern family.
Yeah. So even though this book is set 8 years into the future, why did you feel that this book would resonate with audiences today? Mike, you want to jump on that one?
Sure. I think that we thought, Eric, when we were constructing it, that there were things that were already in play that were going to play out. We just didn't know when they would. And if they played out very negative, for example, the hunting bounty on immigrants, which a rep in Mississippi actually proposed, for bounty of immigrants in the people in the country who were trying to flee to Canada, which is now actually happening. Immigrants are going to Canada instead of staying here. It was things like that that we thought were in play, but would they play out one way or the other? So the timeline in the future, if you will, was appealing for that reason, because it's happened sooner rather than later, I guess you could say, but it's happening. And that's why we thought it would be resonant, because it was already extant. It just needed to be amplified. And we thought we would amplify it, tweak it, and play with it, and fictionalize what we wanted to fictionalize and hope that it didn't come true. But that was our goal.
So how long ago did y'all start working on this book?
Gosh, well, would it have been 2022?
Yeah, time flies. I think we joined forces in the latter part of 2022. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically when y'all started it, y'all pushed it like 10 years in advance.
Pretty much, Eric. Yeah.
All right. So when readers put this book down, outside of being entertained, what do you want them to take away from this book?
I'll go first, if that's okay, Michael. I think two things. The first is the world we live in now, due to the interconnectivity of computers. It's not just flat. Like the big book by Thomas Friedman 20 years ago, The World's Flat. It's not just flat. It is deeply, deeply interconnected. And within half a nanosecond, billions of people anywhere on the globe you can interact with. A lot of that's positive. What we're doing right now is wonderful. We're 3 people online talking, and it clicked a few buttons and here we were. But it also creates an unbelievable risk and potential that any one of us makes a single wrong move innocently, and we can be thrust into things that we never wanted to partake in. And it can be quite negative. The SolarWinds hack, where Russia got into the US government through SolarWinds, a private company, that was a phishing email. So somebody out there that was an employee at SolarWinds, I don't know a name, I don't think a name's been identified, but somebody out there clicked a link at their office, and then a couple of years later found out because of that click, Russia was reading the most confidential, classified State Department memos out there. So point one is the incredible interconnectivity and how that could be both good and bad. And then the second point, then I'll let Michael give his view, is the concentration of power, both money and technology, in politics is very dangerous. And the nexus between those two things, we're seeing that every day. Every other headline is about the richest man in the world who owns 5 tech companies and all the things he's doing in our government. The book talks about a lot of that and focuses on a lot of that. And hopefully through the fictional perspective on that, it'll amplify for people, the real danger inherent there. It's not just any other day in U.S. politics. We're in a whole new world. So those are my two. Michael, what about you?
I think also, I think those are great points, Will. I would just add that in imagining Michael and Pam and their story, at the end of it, you see a couple who've gone through hell, really, and have come out the other side and are still together and still looking towards the future and still love each other. So it is a love story too, in a way. And I think that that's something I'd like the reader to think about when they finish the book is who matters to them in their world, and how can they be better for that person? For all the reasons Will just elaborate it, because we are so interconnected, but often we don't connect in that technical possibility, and we've seen what the powerful and rich can do to government. And so if you connect with people that you do love, maybe you can make a difference somehow to that world that we've imagined and kind of stare at.
Yeah. So one of the popular things on social media people do with AI is like they merge things. Like they'll merge like, I don't know, a monster from our Halloween tradition with like a football team, right? And it comes up with this unique creature that you watch. In reading the book, Brian Davis, I was thinking this was the AI merger between our current president and the richest man in the world. Would that be a fair description of Brian Davis's character in this book?
I think we need to give you a co-author credit, Eric. That's bang on. Yes.
Okay. I just, it was like in reading that, I was like saying, okay, yeah, I see these two merged in together. That's pretty interesting. All right. So without giving away too much, when is the sequel going to drop? Are we working on it? Are we just kind of waiting to see how people receive it? What are we doing?
We're brainstorming. We have lots of fun ideas. Given your last comment, Eric, we may need to bring you into the brainstorming sessions. But the publishing industry, I've learned through a lot of what I've learned has actually been in my collaboration with Michael. Unbelievably slow, glacial pace. So a lot of the books that come out hit the shelves, the first movement on them were 5-10 years earlier, even longer. So we don't have anything we're announcing or anything that's moved too far, but we're really excited about the sequel and the characters. I think Michael and Pam are great characters. And like I said, Michael added, a bunch of incredible, fascinating characters to that initial idea and the way they all interact together. So we're really excited about a series, but we're moving slow, which is consistent with the industry in terms of actual release dates.
But if as I said earlier, if Netflix or a streamer got interested, we would move a lot faster. I mean, in that we think that this has got potential for a limited series because of its structure and the characters, and that it continues, and that it's a political thriller, as well. So in an unexpected way, because nobody is inside the seat of power in this story. I mean, Michael and Pam are as far from it as you can imagine, and yet they get thrust into the middle of it. And what happens if that happens to us? So I think it's a unique angle and a fresh angle to explore. So we'll explore it.
Yeah, well, I mean that's cool because I definitely want to see this story finish out. Like I said, I was reading it and it looked like things were coming to a close, and then I looked at the book and I said, there's still quite a few pages left. So I don't think we're at the end yet. So, and I was right. So again, excellent job on the book, guys. Incredible. How can people get the book?
They can get it.
Google. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Will. No, please.
Google A Quiet Life, Michael McKinley, William Cooper. You'll see it all the various places you get your books, or go to Amazon, Target. It's on the shelves in local bookstores as well. But the easiest thing you can do, and this feels like the kind of the way to get most things these days, is throw it in Google and see where your preferred vendor pops up with it. But it's everywhere. Books are sold, Barnes and Noble, Target, the whole 9 yards.
And if I might add, Eric, my favorite book selling website these days is bookshop.org, which supports all the independent booksellers in the country and has great prices as well. So all the places Will mentioned and bookshop.org will all let you get it.
So, Michael, if people want to reach out to you, how can they get in touch with you?
They can contact me on my website, which is www.liberteo, L-I-B-E, Libert, and then AYO.com.
All right. And Will, how can people reach out to you?
Easiest way is my website, WILL-COOPER.com.
Well, guys, first of all, I'm really, really happy for both of y'all. I hope this is successful as far as a venture, as far as, getting people to buy the book. Hopefully this helps. But I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I don't usually read a lot of fiction anymore. If I read fiction, it's to get away from politics more so. I am one of the few human beings who have yet to see House of Cards, any episode. And I think it went on for like 6 years, I think. But, it's like, as far as, I'm more of, if I'm going to get into the thing, it's like science fiction, that kind of stuff. Even though science fiction has a lot of political implications, it still takes me away from this particular world, right? And so to read your book and to be thoroughly entertained and caught up in it, because it's like, once you pick it up and start reading it, it's really hard to put down. And so y'all did a masterful job on it. And again, like I said, I wish y'all much success. So thank you for that. And when you do come up with the sequel, hopefully I'll still be out here in the world podcasting or whatever, but I definitely will want y'all to come back and promote that as well. Cause if it's anything like this book here, Quiet Life, it's going to be a great book as well.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. And so now it is time for my next guest, Lindsey Cormack. Lindsey Cormack is an associate professor of political science at Stevens Institute of Technology and the director of the Diplomacy Lab. Her research explores congressional communication, civic education, and electoral systems. Lindsey is the creator of DC Inbox, a comprehensive digital archive of Congress to constituent e-newsletters, and the author of How to Raise a Citizen and Why It Is Up to You to Do It, and Congress and U.S. veterans from the GI Bill to the VA crisis. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Bloomberg Business Week, Big Think, and more. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Lindsey Cormack. All right, Lindsey Cormack. How you doing, Professor? You doing good?
I'm doing good today. Thanks for having me.
Classes are doing okay?
Classes are going great. We're coming up on midterms and it's feeling really fun.
Yeah. I remember those days. As a student, I didn't get to teach in the college level, but midterm was like, okay, halfway through, we're going to make it.
That's right.
We're going to get there.
Spring's coming.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So I like to start off with some icebreakers before we get into the interview. And the first icebreaker is a quote. So I want you to respond to this quote. The greatest danger to a democracy is an uninformed electorate, where legislators bow to the demands of the ignorant majority instead of governing based on the best interests of greater society. What does that quote mean to you?
So that is something that I would 1,000% agree with, in the sense that democracy doesn't care how smart you are, how educated you are. We all count the same. And so the real risk that we have is having, a set of people who believe something that is maybe either not true or something that doesn't actually help, but acting upon that impulse. And so understanding our system better, understanding our sort of like place in that system and how to navigate all the complexities of all the issues in it is important for having a more functional and more fun operational democracy.
Yeah. All right. So the next icebreaker, I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
13.
Okay. So your question is, Do you think there is such a thing as unbiased news or media, and why?
No, and because it would be impossible.
Okay.
Like we all come at the world with a different perspective based on our lived experiences. The stories we tell are biased. The ones we choose not to tell, we can never see. So yeah, I think it's impossible to think that there's such a thing as an unbiased anything.
I understand. All right. Well, that's kind of Hobbesian, but it's okay. I understand. You stated in your book, How to Raise a Citizen, 4 reasons why Americans don't know as much about politics as we should. Intricate by design, a tradition of not talking, hating politics, and schools out. Which one does the most damage in your opinion?
Ooh, I really like that question. Which one does the most damage? Because I do think they're all damaging. Intricate design is not the answer because that's just sort of how it is. I think, the most damage is probably this narrative that politics is all bad or that it's for egomaniacs and it's only for people who want to rig a game. I think this hating politics narrative that we teach our kids from the time they're little until we're dead is problematic because then we have this sort of complaint orientation to politics versus an orientation that's well, this is my government. How can I make it better? So I think that's probably the most damaging.
Yeah, because, one of the things you stress is for parents to, well, I'll get into that a little later. Because I do have a direct question about that. How challenging is it as a political science professor to teach incoming college students about politics?
I mean, I'll say that I thought it was more challenging when I started, and now that I've been doing it for 10 years, I just realized the exercise is not make sure they know everything that I think they need to know. It's figure out where they're at and start building upon that. Teach them the tools to go figure out stuff as it arises in their life. And so it's not difficult per se, but it is a little bit depressing in the sense that at the school that I'm at, I have really smart students who have great test scores on all the admissions exams. They're really good at doing school. But if you ask them about very basic things about the federal government, they will not know the answer. If you ask them really anything about state and local government, they won't know the answer. And that's not their fault. I don't think oh man, these kids are so bad at it. I think, oh man, what have we done to them systemically that they don't know these things? We've given them the power to be 18-year-olds who can vote, but how can they really exercise that if they do not understand the system that they're a part of?
Yeah. So I've had political science professors on, and so one of the things I try to ask them is, what do you learn from your students to make you a better professor?
I mean, I learn something every day from them. I think that's one of the reasons it's the best job that anyone can ever do, because young people are hopeful. They are not as jaded as older people, and they sort of come to the world with this less prejudicial lens. They don't know what the Democratic answer is. They don't know what the Republican answer is. And so they're just sort of trying to make sense of their world, and they teach me stuff all the time. I ask roll call questions at the beginning of every day, and 4 of them are to make sure that they read what's happening. And I only call on 5 students at random. But the 5th question is always, what's good or new in politics since I last saw you? And I learned something in that because we all have different media diets. The algorithms are going to put different things in front of us, and they teach me stuff all the time. And then I have to go write it on the board and say, oh, I did not know that. I have not heard that. And then I follow up, I figure it out. And then we have this online thing where I put it in the announcements and say, here's what I found. What is it that you guys were seeing when you told me about this?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right. So I don't know if you did any background on me, but I used to be an elected official. So what advantage do I have as a politician knowing that only 47% of the U.S. adult population can identify the 3 branches of government?
What advantage do you have as someone who's lived on the other side of this?
Yes.
I mean, you have tons of advantages. You have the experiential advantage of understanding how the pieces work or don't work together. I imagine you have a better viewpoint on how different layers of government can interact or don't, or also how the system is reinforcing and sometimes a little dysfunctional. And it's not something that I really fault people for not knowing this, but I do think that if we really want this experiment, this United States enterprise to go as well as it can, we have to want to know these things. People who are on the inside like you do have a leg up because you've lived it. but we would all be better if we knew a little bit more.
Yeah. So I was thinking more of a conniving kind of thing. I was going Hobbesian myself on that question. As a politician, how do in order to stay elected, how does that give me an advantage that people don't know stuff about their government?
Well, it's much harder to hold you accountable. You can get away with a lot more if we don't know things. And I'll tell you something, in my world, I run this database called DC Inbox, and it's members of Congress in their official capacity that send emails to their constituents. And all the time they will say things like, I introduced this bill, or this is going to happen here. And that's not true. And they know it's not going anywhere because they'll be in the minority party and be like, I'm doing this work on your behalf. And I'll be like, this bill's going to get referred to 3 committees and die in committee, and there's no way this gets passed. But to your constituents, you look like you sure are trying really hard. And so the less you know, the harder it is to hold people accountable. And people on the inside, they know that too.
Yeah. So, it was kind of scary when I first ran for the legislature. I had run for office before, but when I first ran for the legislature, it was a special election. So I had to go get signatures. And, some of the questions that people asked me was like, oh my God, these people don't know a lot of stuff that's going on. And I remember one guy, he signed a petition. He said, oh, yeah. He said, now, that means you get to go to Washington, right? And I said, no, I go right downtown. You know that big building downtown with the dome? He said, oh, yeah, that's where I'll be working if y'all vote for me. He said, oh, okay, I got you. Also, there's a state Congress, too. So I really had to give like a quick civics lesson right then. But the scariest thing I ever had was when I think it was the first time I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2006. And it was a lawyer. We were at a barbershop, and it was a lawyer. And he said, Fleming, now, when you get elected to the Senate, which part of the state are you going to represent? The northern part or the southern part? And in my mind, I was like going, this is a lawyer asking me his question? An older man. He was older than me. And I was like, oh my God. So, I asked that question and somebody's like, okay, how can I take advantage of this? But in real life, it was very, very scary to me that how uninformed, a good number of people are, people that you would think would know stuff, just don't really know the basic operations of government. And now we live in a society where we get all this information and we're being thrown this, and people got to make decisions and now stand in line. It's just, it's really, really kind of scary to me. Does it scare you a little bit? Or
I don't know if fear is the emotion that I have to that. I sort of have like an empathetic sadness, which is no one raises themselves. No one is responsible for learning everything that they're going to learn. And we sort of put it on people to learn this stuff because we don't teach it in schools by and large. And so when I have people later in life who really don't know the basics, and plenty of people confide to me, be like, I don't actually know this. I'm like, no one knows this. Don't feel bad about that. So many people don't know these things. And it's really not anyone's individual fault. It's sort of our collective fault for thinking someone else will take care of it or someone else will think about this thing instead of recognizing oh no, we are the crew of this experiment. We are not just passengers in democracy. We're the crew that powers it. So we have to figure out a little bit more.
Yeah. So in your answers, you allowed me to bring up a couple of questions real quick, a little earlier than I planned. What changes, since you mentioned DC Inbox, what changes have you seen in letters from congressmen or women to their constituents as far as what they tell them or just the style even?
Yeah, there's a lot of big stylistic changes. This database started in 2009, and the internet was a lot weirder back then. It was much more idiosyncratic, and it was much more text-focused. And in the last 15 years, more so on the Republican side than the Democratic side, there's been a shift to doing shorter things with pictures or shorter things with infographics or images that sort of explain a situation versus a lot of text that kind of describes the details. It's also the case that sort of since Donald Trump won in 2016, the use of all capital letters, again, more on the Republican side than the Democratic side, is something that you can sort of see stylistically, where, that like all caps, yelling, very important thing, that really wasn't a feature of most congressional communication until that became palatable or at least acceptable for the president. And then they sort of took that on too. There's plenty of things to learn in it, like men and women talk about different things depending on people's sort of backgrounds. If they were like businessmen or doctors or lawyers, they have different styles. But it's just like a tool that is free for anyone to use. I know a lot from it, but it is my like sincerest hope that other people learn what they're going to learn. I just had a reporter from Congressional Quarterly reach out to me because he was like, I want to see how often they're cursing in these things. And I was like, okay, well, let's look into it. And I just like went through 5 curse words with him. I had someone else who was asking me about the word feminism. And I was like, they don't really say that much in these things. So you can learn really anything you want by just querying the database and figuring it out.
Yeah. That's interesting. And it's also pretty cool that you have that running archive like that. Should there be a national curriculum for American politics that is required for high school students to graduate?
Yeah, it's a really hard question because we don't have really anything in the way of a national curriculum anywhere, right? It's like all the states get so much leeway on what they're going to do. And then once you break it down into states, we know that all the districts do it differently. Parochial schools are different than independent schools and charter schools and public schools. And so I'm not sure that it's even a worthwhile thing to think about because the fight then is like, what are we going to put in that national curriculum? I think the best thing that we can do is give it more time in the classroom, because if we look at time in the classroom from the 1940s to today, it's only decreased. And the way that we do it is not particularly effective no matter how you're looking at that data. Like the nation's report card assessing civics education in 8th grade has been stagnant from 1998 until today. If we look at AP US test scores for AP US government, it's one of the lowest scoring tests every year it's administered, except in 2024. And at first you might think like, oh my God, they're really teaching it. They're turning it around. But instead what they did in 2024 is they recalibrated the grading because not enough kids were getting college credit for it. And so we haven't taught them different things. We've grade inflated in a way that says like, just because you don't know as much means you're going to get passed here anyhow. So I don't think the question is like, should it be one nationalized standardizer? I don't have an answer to that. The only answer I have is we need more time, and it needs to happen at a lot of different entry points, not just in the schools, but you need to see it in your homes. You should see it in your communities. We should have it as a value. And frankly, as one of the best things about being in America is the agency to change your government. So it's not something that should be like, that's for nerds or that's for evil people. It's like, no, this should be for all of us. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I share your enthusiasm in that. And that's the reason why I couch the question like that is because if you're going to be a citizen of the United States, you have to take a test. And they have these flashcards and all this stuff. And I'm sure you've looked at those flashcards. I've looked at them and I'm like, I know a lot of my friends would not pass this if their citizenship was on the line, right?
Yeah.
So.
And schools are moving to do that. Schools so that's sort of a wave of educational reform that's happening right now. Schools are like, we're going to make our students pass the citizen test. And what they mean in most of their actual implementations is they're going to give 10 questions from the 100-question list. And if you get 6 right, you will considered as someone who's passed. Now, do I think that's actually an effective way to teach civics? No. Do you ask educational experts about it? Is that an effective way? No. We know experiential and action civics are far more useful in terms of letting students understand their own agency and how they do this process. Can they remember some pieces of historical information and tell it to you with a 60% success rate? Yes. And so I don't think that that's like the way to do it, but I do understand that on paper seems like a good thing. And there's plenty of states that are moving to say like, well, we're going to have our students pass the citizenship test. I'm like, you mean your students are going to have multiple chances to take a test where they have to get 60% of the answers right? Okay. I don't know that that's like the most effective way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You put a map in the book. And it was really, really scary because it was like I was looking at Nebraska, right? Nebraska has the most unique system. It's the only one that's unicameral, and yet there is no requirement for the students to learn that. And I'm like going, if there would be any state, it would seem like it would be Nebraska because Louisiana, they have a different kind of law. But I mean, Nebraska is the only state that's unicameral, so you would think that they would take some pride in teaching that and helping citizens understand how that works compared to the other 49 states where they have a bicameral system. So,
yeah, and that's not to say that there's no schools in Nebraska teaching it. It's just to say that there's not a statewide requirement that this gets taught in any of the K through 12 years. Nebraska is also unique in that it splits its electoral college votes in a way that only itself and Maine does. All the states have sort of like quirks that are particular to them. And the reason that I put that map in there is to show that it's a very hard problem to get your head around in the first place. When we say like, what are they learning? And it's like, well, the answer is not enough, but I can't tell you the specific thing in every piece because it's so multifaceted. And when it gets right down to it, it kind of depends on like who happens to be in that classroom. It's really hard to say, here's what all the students are exposed to because they're not exposed to the same things.
Yeah. So what should be the bare minimum an American citizen should know about their government?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you want them to be able to do, but I'll tell you what I think is lacking right now. I think there's a really big piece that's lacking around what does the Constitution say? And what I mean by that is most of our students get out through K through 12 and they will never have read it from beginning to end. It's only about 19 pages, and every person who's ever like played a board game knows that it goes better if you understand the rules of the game. And so I think it's important that before we set our kids free and be like, go ahead, take on the rights of voting and all the other responsibilities of adulthood, they should understand the rules that are underlying that. I find that in Intro to American Politics, that's one of the most eye-opening things because they're like, oh, no one ever taught me this, or I never read this, or they think it was written in like Old English and they're not going to be able to get it. And it's like, no, everyone, this really spells out a lot of things. So I think that's part one. I think part two is federalism is so incredibly important. And when we interviewed teachers across the United States, that's something that they themselves said, like a lot of them don't have a grasp on it. They don't know that the federal government does different things than the state government, than the local government. And what I find is most college students that I interact with don't appreciate that many of the things they care about, stuff like marijuana legalization or access to reproductive health care or access to guns, is mostly controlled at the state level. Those are not really federal questions right now, but they don't even really know how that system works. I also think we need to have more opportunities to build the muscle memory of what it is to have a hard conversation, because we have really over-indexed on like personal sort of like non-annoyance, where it's like, I want to watch my media and listen to my things and not have to deal with society, and I'm going to hear the opinions that I want to hear anyhow. But we need to have these lower stakes real life engagement with one another where we can listen and learn and then express our views. And the goal is not, let me convince you I'm right and you're wrong. The goal is, let's learn a little bit more about how everyone's coming to the table. And I think if we don't give them those opportunities because we're so focused on SAT scores and ACT scores, then we are really hurting ourselves, because that's the enterprise. It is a persuasion game. It is about attention. It is about learning from each other. But if we don't practice how to do that, it's not surprising that we don't get good outcomes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because if you don't really know anything, it's going to be hard for you to persuade somebody. And then the challenge is, if I'm a candidate running for something, if you don't have a grasp of what I'm talking about, then I'm not going to be able to persuade you because you are confused. And I think that's where we get caught up in the talking points. It's like, okay, well, this issue, so everybody seems to have a focus, so we just focus on those issues. And it's like on a national scale that may be important, but on a local level, not so much. It just all depends on where you are. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And I think that's right. When you say people are confused, it's like you put confusion with mistrust or confusion with distrust. That's not a functional way to engage in anything. Like, you wouldn't like your medical system if you said all the doctors are liars and cheats and egomaniacs and the system is rigged. You have to trust a little bit, but you also need to know that there's stuff to learn. And that's something that we really don't have, that orientation in politics. It's this other sort of like very negative, very bad place, when in reality, the fact that most of us have roads to drive on, clean water to drink, schools that are regulated airways, that's government intervention and it's good, but we don't really think about it that way.
Yeah, because most people like to say, "Well, we don't. Why do we even need government and all that?" And I always tell them, and people that listen to the podcast, I use this example a lot. Just one day, just go and take all the stop signs from your intersection close to your house. Just take them all away for a day and watch what happens. Right? I said that is an example of what government does. It's like that's just a small example, but politics and government is in everything that we do. And that's why I feel that we should pay more attention to it. I don't want people to be junkies like you and I, but I do want people to have a working knowledge so they can function and make intelligent decisions.
Absolutely. And so government's inevitable, like you said. It's pervasive. It touches everything. But we do sort of have this strange approach where we're like, we love police officers. We love first responders. We love firemen. But guess what? Their budgets don't get allocated unless you have civilian politicians who are doing that work. And so you can't really have one without the other. And it doesn't help anyone to not know more. We actually all stand to benefit if we learn a little bit more, even though it might feel uncomfortable because many of us are underpracticed and didn't learn as much as we probably would have wanted to when we were younger.
Yeah. So why do you passionately advocate for parents to teach their children about government and civics?
Well, look, if I could wave a magic wand, I would do more of this in schools, but I can't wave that wand, and changing state policy is really hard. So that's why I think parents have to be the role models here. It's also the case that other people who are doing similar research have shown that one of the things that best predicts your child's likelihood to vote, their likelihood to be willing to engage in conversations that challenge them, and their general proclivity to things like volunteering or mutual aid is best influenced by seeing their parents do it or seeing a nice custodial adult, someone, you could be a grandparent, could be aunt or uncle, but someone in that role where you pass that down. And it's okay, I think, for parents and grandparents today to be frustrated and be like, well, I never learned this or I don't know enough. But we are the adults in the room now. And if we want our kids to have something better, it's incumbent upon us to say well, we're going to change this. We're going to model what that behavior is. It might be uncomfortable. It might be new, but it's not a bad thing to do. And I also think it's important because parents are the best teachers that our kids are ever going to have. They learn from what we do and what we don't do. If they never see us vote, why would they vote? If they never see us have a conversation with a neighbor about the state of our sidewalks, why would they think that that's something they should care about? We have to show it to them because if we don't do it, they're learning that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because I was the way I was brought up, and I noticed that you credit your civics teacher in high school for being a major influence with you. In my life, it was my great aunt. Whenever I got home from school, she lived across the street, so I would go over there first until my parents got home. But it was like she would always watch the news, so I watched the news with her. When I was very, very young, my parents got me a set of encyclopedias, World Book encyclopedias, to date myself. And it was like the President of the United States spread was the most fascinating thing. It was like 2 pages of pictures before we even got into the article, right? And I said, I want to be one of these guys, right? But, my aunt would take me to go vote, right? Whenever she went to vote, she would go. And then, sometimes I would go with my parents, whenever or whatever, because in Chicago, the precincts were either in somebody's basement or at the church, so it was all walking distance, right? So I was really kind of exposed, but it got to a point where my parents were asking me questions about who should I vote for, what's going on, I know you pay attention to this, da, 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 da. But it's not like that for the majority of kids, especially African-American kids. So I just, I just really appreciate you as being an advocate pushing for parents to be more engaged into the discussion with their children.
Well, thank you. And I think it's parents, but it's also all of us as adults, because like you said, you never know who your civic role model is going to be. It might be an aunt. It might be a neighbor who you happen to hang out with. And if we all are in this system together, the little actions that we do for our children reverberate for other children. And when you point out that it's different for African-American youth versus non-African-American youth, it's also really hard for immigrants who are here with parents who didn't grow up in this tradition, because they can't really lean on their parents to say, teach me about this. And so if we can teach children who had parents who grew up here, they can do that sort of connective work of like, oh, well, I'm friends with this kid, or oh, I can sort of expand my network or my social circle with this. And so the things that we do are not just beneficial for our own little families, but it does sort of like spread out and influence other families because it changes the culture around it on these little individual choices.
So my final question is, how does having a better understanding about politics contribute to positive mental health?
Oh, I love this question. There's a lot of different ways, but I'll give you sort of the shortest version. When we think about the things that plague young people right now, a lot of it is depression and social isolation and anxiety about the future. All of these things are sort of rooted in not being tethered to something and some level of uncertainty. And this feels even worse if we have a media environment that exacerbates everything with like, here's this breaking news and here's all this stuff and can you believe it? But if you can come back to some core things with some certainty, like, oh, I've read the Constitution. I actually don't think that's possible. Ooh, or maybe we'll try this for a little bit and then the courts will step in. You can calm those parts of your brain. You're far less likely to be susceptible to misinformation. But the second reason that I think knowing more and understanding and doing more of your politics is beneficial for mental health is at the local level, the stuff that requires you to repeatedly show up in person. It gives you purpose. It gives you a sense of community. It gives you the ability to understand your own agency. And all of those things are shown to more positively influence mental health than social isolation, doom scrolling, thinking that, the world's going to end because you're hearing it from every direction. If you can just change these small parts and whatever interests you, whatever's important in your local level, then you're going to be a better rooted, more functioning human because you have an understanding of the world and you see yourself as a part of it.
Yeah. And, when I saw that in the book, I was like, okay, yeah, because I'm a big advocate on mental health and having a strong, positive mental health. I think it's just as important as your physical health, if not more. So, for you to address it, about being more, having more of a political efficacy relates to being more positive in your mental attitude about society and life in general. I thought that was a really nice touch, and I greatly appreciate that. I didn't see anything sometimes when I research, for my guests and especially professors, they got like that little grade thing where you can go online and grade your teachers and all that. So I didn't see anything pop up on you, but if you were, and I said it was last, but I got to ask this, what have you seen as far as you being a professor, students say, because there was one, they said, she likes to make us read, you know what I'm saying? So what is it that when students review you, they say, okay, Professor Cormack's going to make us do what?
Yeah. So I have some of my students who wrote passages that are included at the end of the book. So it's knowable what they think about me. I think the things that they kind of take from the class is that I make them inhabit viewpoints that they don't naturally come to. And what I mean by that is we do these debates in my class where they don't get to pick what side they're on. And that means sometimes they have to step into a perspective that they have not previously thought about. And at first it's uncomfortable and they don't like it. But then I tell them, I'm like, guys, this makes you better at understanding your own positions and values by trying to take the other side for a little bit. And so I think that sort of educational friction and poking is something that I do. And at first they don't like it. And then they come away with a greater appreciation because ooh, that is actually a neat way to learn, is to go hang out with the other side's arguments for a while and see the value in them.
But I had a professor that made me take the pro-apartheid position. That also dates how old I am. When we was in college, apartheid was still there in South Africa. So I was the captain of the debate team that had to take the pro-apartheid decision. Now, what I did was I literally wrote the General Council of South Africa. The closest one from where I was in school was to Chicago. And they sent me a box of stuff. And we cremated my classmates. It was like we were like P.W. Bolton's kids, you know what I'm saying, the way we went at it. But she said, that's how I want you to approach issues. We want you to be able to dissect both sides so you can make an intelligent argument. Whichever side you're on, if you understand both sides of the argument, then it makes your argument better. So I'm glad that you use that approach. So, Professor, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to get your books, how can they do that?
The book is sold anywhere that you buy books, online and spaces. So like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Bookshop, all of those are equally good. You can also go to howtoraiseacitizen.com. And if you want me to like sign it or inscribe it or send it as a gift to someone, if you order it directly from me, I can do that. And I've been sending those out throughout the United States. I think the easiest way to contact me is probably like over email or through Instagram. Those are the places I most often inhabit online. I'm so easy to find. How to Raise a Citizen has my contact information. And then on Instagram, I'm also How to Raise a Citizen.
Well, Professor Lindsey Cormack, I greatly appreciate your passion on teaching, not just the students in the classroom, but encouraging parents throughout the country to be more engaged in teaching, because it's just something that's really, really needed. And as somebody that actually has to ask people for votes, it's comforting to know that there's somebody out there trying to teach people the importance of voting and what they need to be voting for, and and who you're voting for, what position it is. So thank you for that. And again, thank you for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate that.
And thank you for doing this work and for having me. I had a really nice time.
Yes, ma'am. All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. So I want to thank Will Cooper, Mike McKinley, and Lindsey Cormack for coming on the show and talking about their respective books. And as always, just offering great insight into what's happening. I really hope that y'all will get those books, especially for parents. Professor Cormack's book about how to raise a citizen is very, very good and very encouraging, right? You know, she lays out the challenges that's out there, but it's encouraging that, you know, you can teach it. And being the professor that she is, if there's some things you need to brush up on, she puts that in the book as well, right? Because it's really, really important for our children to be better citizens and maybe not make the mistakes that we have made, right? You know, for those of you who are doing that, great. It's still a good book to kind of refresh you on some things. If you are not doing that because you believe that it's taboo to talk about politics and all that stuff, yeah, get over that and teach your kids the basics. Okay. As for Will and Mike's book, it's a great read. It's a thriller, if you didn't gather that from the interview. And it is, I'm telling you, when you start reading that book, it'll flow. It is one of the easiest reads as far as fiction that I've read, right? I mean, it's just, you know, once you start turning that page and the next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, it's like I'm almost finished with this thing. It's really, really compelling, and it's really, really a good read and entertaining and all that. And I really hope that they can make that into a series or a movie or whatever the case may be, because to see that on the screen would be awesome. But read the book, because the book is always better than the movie. I'm sorry. That's just me. But the book's always better than the movie. All right. So I want to close out with this. It was mentioned in the news that, you know, Representative Al Green from Texas was censured by the House of Representatives for basically getting up and pointing his cane at Donald Trump and chastising the president about cutting Medicaid. And, you know, Representative Green knew what he was doing was out of order, and he willingly accepted the censure. He knew that he deserved that. And I thought that him making it clear that he didn't have anything personal against the speaker or anything like that, the rules are the rules, and he knew he was breaking the rules. He said he did it with intentionality, and he handled that, professionally and gracefully. Here's my take on the whole thing. I never would have been in the room, right? Now, some members walked out when they kicked Representative Green out, but I am of the opinion that none of them should have been there in the first place. I wanted the visual of all of the sycophants, the Republicans, cheering their avatar on, and those who are the opposition not give them an audience, right? Because the biggest challenge we have in this society is that we have to give him an audience because he is the president. We have to pay attention to what he says. And it was just a simple disagreement about policy and direction. That's one thing. But when you are systematically destroying the very nation that we all live in, it's a whole different conversation. And it's something that we don't need to actively support, right? Or give the appearance of supporting, or give the appearance that this is normal. And I think if the Democrats had not been in the room at all, I think on both the House and the Senate side, I think that would have sent a clear message that this is not a normal time. And, the reporters were waiting. They were actually kind of hoping that the Democrats would walk out. And, that would have been the story. You know what I'm saying? They would have covered what he said, but the story would have been the Democrats, and, Senator Slotkin basically got good reviews on her response to his address. But the reality was that should have been it as far as public appearance. Members of the Democratic Party are in a tough situation, especially in Congress, because they do not have the numbers, right, to push an agenda or really to stop a lot of the bad stuff that's happening. But if those members of Congress that have never served in a state legislature before would take their lead from the black members who actually have served in state legislatures before, I think they would have better strategies of how to deal with this time, because black members in state legislatures have always been outnumbered, right? It's one thing to be outnumbered as a party, but to be outnumbered just because of your race is a whole different conversation. And that's what black people have had to deal with throughout this political process, at least since the end of Reconstruction, right? So to me, if there is any time where leadership and advice needs to be followed, it should be the black members who have dealt with being outnumbered all their political lives, because we've had to be creative in our protests and the way that we utilize the rules, the way that we had to strategize to primarily stop bad stuff, but every now and then get some good stuff passed, right? A lot of times if we got something passed, it was because of our individual moxie and relationships that we had put together on both sides of the aisle to get some stuff done that needed to be done that could pass the political mustard test, right? But the reality is that sometimes you just got to show out a little bit. I'm a former member of a caucus that literally had a member bring a mule train to the Mississippi State Capitol to highlight an issue, right? I've watched the entire Black Caucus get up and speak on a bill to kill it, right? I've watched us walk out of a State of the State address. to send a message. I've seen us all vote no for a particular appropriation to send a message to that agency that you need to do right by Black folk. Right? There's various ways. I mean, you use the rules to read the bills and slow the process down so you can negotiate and figure out a way to fix some stuff, right? Even if it's not the bill that you're fighting over, slow the process down. There's a myriad of things you can do, right? And if you understand the rules, if you master the rules, you can do it, even as a minority. I've seen it happen. I've done it, right? So to me, if they had asked little old me, what should we do? I would have told them, don't go. I probably wouldn't even been at the Capitol building, to be honest, because it wouldn't have been really important for me to talk to the press. I think me not being in the chamber was my statement, right? But I wouldn't have been in the room at all. And, there's one particular representative that had I been in the room and I saw it, Representative Green probably wouldn't have been the only one censured, right? Because it was one Democrat, I think it was the lady from New Mexico, was holding up a sign saying this is not normal, and a Republican, a man, slapped it down out of her hand or snatched it and threw it, something. But he physically came at her. If I had seen that, that would have been the last time he would have done that. And I have no problem saying that, because you don't assault fellow members, and especially a man assaulting a woman in that chamber. That's not cool. Right. So I probably would have got in trouble for that, and they probably would have came down a little harder on me than they did Representative Green. But I'm just telling you, it's like, that's why I don't think the Democrats should have even been in the room. So they wouldn't have had those kind of moments. So the nation would just get to see them showing out and acting a fool and make their judgment that way. Because, people that's on their side are going to say, they didn't even show up and blah, blah. Bruh, it's like Representative Green and Representative Crockett and all those Democrats from Texas, they were alive when the Democrats in the state of Texas, in the state legislature, literally left the state. So these folks wouldn't have a legal quorum, right, to conduct business. They literally were trying to send the Texas Rangers after these people. And they were doing interviews and they wouldn't disclose their location. They hung out for a week outside the Capitol building, shut it down, because they were tired of the railroad. They were tired of the games that were being played, because they understood that these decisions that are being made impact people's lives, literally. Not just whether they got a job or not, but whether they live or die, whether they can eat. That's where we are now. And, drastic times call for drastic measures. There's an old saying that I always try to live by, is that, a politician thinks of the next election, but a statesman thinks about the next generation. And if we're going to have an effort to teach people about the process, then we got to have a process left for them to participate in. And at the rate we're going, that might be in question. Now, not might be, it is in question. So I would have encouraged my colleagues, including Leader Jeffries and Leader Schumer, not to be in the room, not to shake anybody's hand, nothing. Because there's nothing cordial about what's going on. There's nothing fake cordial about what's going on. The image that the American people should have seen was one half of the room empty, and proceed to just go to town. Because even with them being there and showing respect for the office, you literally had members on the Republican side introducing bills saying that we know we're going to kick all the Democrats off committees. I mean, it is what it is, people. And it's time that Democrats take the gloves off, you know. And this a line has been paraphrased, and I'm not quoting the line exactly right, but it was a scene in the Mac where one of the pimps was confronting the Mac, the main character in the story, about one of his prostitutes being stolen. Where the Mac, and the guy that played it was Max Julian, he had this line, and I'm paraphrasing. He said, now we can handle this like gentlemen, but we can get into some gangster shit, right? So I don't think we can handle it like ladies and gentlemen. I don't think we can. I think we've gotten past that point. I think we need to send a message, and maybe by sending the message, we can get back to regular dialogue. But until we get back to that, I think it's time to take the gloves off. I think it's time for us to do some drastic. That was an opportunity to do some drastic. Not showing up at all would have sent a national message. And then along with, Senator Slotkin making her remarks, then it should have been a unified message. It's like, we are not going to normalize tyranny. We're going to normalize authoritarianism. We're not going to normalize what you are seeing in these first few days of the Trump administration, because it is not normal. This is not a normal time. Governor Walz was right. These people are weird. These people are not normal. It is not okay. If you get all your news from Fox or OAN or Newsmax, you are not getting even a third of the story. You're being force-fed stuff because they're trying to take advantage of your limited knowledge of the process, right? I can say that because even though I'm not a regular watcher, I watch enough. And I read what's on X and other platforms. And so I know what you're being force-fed. So I think that would have been a shock to your system if you saw that half of the room was empty. Now, you could accept what that story was as it would have been told to you from those outlets, those conservative outlets. But the human instinct is to inquire a little more. And you would have gotten a response as to why they didn't show up. But that would have got your attention, right? And as for folks that support the Democrats, that would have been a sign that, all right, game on. Because right now, Republicans are frustrated because they're not addressing the cost of living issues, right? And they want to get answers as to why. And on the other side, the Democratic side, people are frustrated because it's like, what are we doing? What's the game plan? How are we going to fight this? Right? And I heard one announcer, and I love her for doing it because I love sports analogies. She got on her show and said, this is just the first quarter, y'all. We still got a whole game to play. We still can win this thing. We just can't get frustrated. We got to stay focused, right? No matter how they came out the gate, we still can win this thing, right? And that's the mindset we have to have. If we are really, really concerned and really, really engaged about having an America that lives up to its creed, then we can't give up now. We can't get frustrated. We got to start fighting. We got to change that playbook. Got to get off the script and start, as Hank Stram said, matriculating down the field. And the field is politics, the game. We've got to start making a difference to show that this is not normal. And there are a group of people who are fighting to bring normal back. Or to be honest, some semblance of normal, some semblance of order, some semblance of calm, right? It's time again to take the gloves off. It's time to fight. And if we are going to win this, then we have to be all in. We can't half do it. We can't be on the fence. You know, there's a couple of people, this guy from New Hampshire and this lady from Washington State. Yeah. You know, in a different time, in a different place, the way that y'all are playing politics, but you know, you trying to censor everybody, you know, for whatever favor you think that is, or I don't know, you know, I'm not going to really grill y'all about that, but yeah, the normal way of thinking in a political sense right now at the federal level, yeah, you're going to have to kick that habit, and you're going to have to get with the program, and you're going to have to fight for what you want. Cause I know all you're thinking about is, well, I want to get reelected. Great. But if there's no process for you to get elected in, what difference does that make? It's time to stop being timid. It's time to stop playing it safe. You know, it's time for us to fight for what we believe in, whatever it takes. I'll leave you with this story. My dad got upset with me one morning because I was still at home and I hadn't gone to school. And I told him I didn't want to go to school today. I'd never missed a day in school till I got to college. Whole other story. But from elementary school to, well, no, I missed some days in kindergarten because I got real sick with asthma. But basically, from first grade on through my senior year in high school, I didn't miss a day of school. And this one particular day, I was still at the house and I didn't realize he was coming home. And he was upset. Why are you not at school? And I told him, I'm scared. And he said, why are you scared? I said, because this guy, he threatened to beat me up and he's going to do it because he's bigger, he's older. And he said, what are you getting mad about? And I said, we were playing football and I tackled him real hard and he's been wanting to fight me ever since. And, you know, I avoided him one day, but I didn't want to. And my dad said, you're going to school. He said, if you don't go to school, then I'm going to get you, which I didn't want that to happen. And he said, if he comes at you and you feel as though that you can't handle him hand to hand, understand that that's why God always places bricks and bottles on the road for you to grab. And of course, God doesn't place bricks and bottles as littering, but I understood what he was saying. He's saying, do what you got to do. If he's beating you one way, then you got to figure out another way to beat him and get him off of you. And that's where we are. If we are serious about saving this nation, then we got to use the tools that are available to us. And some of them are not conventional. Some people might say they're not fair. But we're going to have to utilize those tools to save what we believe in. Thank you for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.